Hari Bol Mother Mahadevi, to our weekly Krishna book reading in Srila Prabhupada's most sacred house in Sri Vrindavan Dham. Before we begin, let us offer our respectful obeisances to Srila Prabhupada and to each other. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. And to each other, Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyo Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. For all our online viewers, please note there are subtitles given below in the page which will help you to follow us along. And you can turn to chapter 79 in your Krishna book. Chapter 79, the liberation of Bilvala and Lord Balram's touring the sacred places. Lord Balram prepared himself to meet the demon Bilvala. At the time when the demon usually attacked the sacred place, there appeared a great hailstorm. The whole sky became covered with dust, and the atmosphere became surcharged with a filthy smell. Just after this, the mischievous demon Bilvala began to shower torrents of stool and urine and other impure substances on the arena of sacrifice. After this onslaught, the demon himself appeared with a great trident in his hand. He was a gigantic person, and his black body was like a huge mass of carbon. His hair, his beard, and his mustache appeared reddish like copper. And because of his great beard and mustache, his mouth appeared dangerous and fierce. As soon as he saw the demon, Lord Balram prepared to attack him. He first considered how he could smash the great demon to pieces. Lord Balram then called for his plough and club, and they immediately appeared before him. The demon Bilvala was flying in the sky, and at the first opportunity, Lord Balram dragged him down with his plough and angrily smashed the demon's head with his club. Balram's striking fractured the demon's forehead, making blood flow profusely. Screaming loudly, the demon, who had been such a great disturbance to the pious Brahmanas, fell to the ground like a great mountain, with a red oxide peak being struck and smashed to the ground by a thunderbolt.
The inhabitants of Naimisharanya, learned sages and Brahmanas, became most pleased by seeing this, and they offered their respectful obeisances, their respectful prayers to Lord Balram. They offered their heartfelt blessings to the Lord, and all agreed that none of Lord Balram's attempts to do something would ever be a failure. The sages and Brahmanas then performed a ceremonial bathing of Lord Balram, just as demigods bathe King Indra when he is victorious over the demons. The Brahmanas and the sages honored Lord Balrama by presenting him with first-class new clothing and ornaments and the lotus garland of victory. This garland was the reservoir of all beauty and was everlasting. It was never to be dried up.
After this incident, Lord Balarama took permission from the Brahmanas assembled at Naimisharanya and, accompanied by other Brahmanas, went to the bank of the river Kaushiki. After taking his bath in this holy place, he proceeded toward the river Sarayu and visited the source of the river. Traveling on the bank of the Sarayu river, he gradually reached Prayaga, where there is a confluence of the rivers, the Ganges, Yamuna, and Saraswati. Here also he took his bath, and then he worshipped in the local temples of the demigods, and as enjoined in the Vedic literature, offered oblations to the forefathers and sages. He gradually reached the ashrama of the sage Pulaha, and from there he went to the rivers Kandayi and Gomati. After this, he took his bath in the river Vipasa. Then he gradually came to the bank of the Sona river. Though Sona river is still running as one of the big rivers in the Bihar province. He also took his bath there and performed the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies. He continued his travels and gradually came to the pilgrimage city of Gaya, where there is a celebrated Vishnu temple. According to the advice of his father Vasudeva, he offered oblations to the forefathers in this Vishnu temple. From here, he traveled to the delta of the Ganges, where the sacred river Ganges mixes with the Bay of Bengal. This sacred place is called Ganga Sagra, and at the end of January every year there is still a great assembly of saintly persons and pious men, just as there is an assembly of saintly persons in Prayaga every year called the Magha Mela Fair.
After finishing his bathing and ritualistic ceremonies at Ganga Sagar, Lord Balram proceeded toward the mountain known as Mahendra Parvat, where he met Parashuram, an incarnation of Lord Krishna, and offered him respect by bowing down before him. After this, Lord Balram turned towards southern India and visited the banks of the river Godavari. After taking his bath in the river Godavari and performing the necessary ritualistic ceremonies, he gradually visited the other rivers, the Veena, Pampa, and Bhimarathi. On the bank of the river Bhimarathi is the deity called Swami Kartikeya. After visiting Kartikeya, Lord Balram gradually proceeded to Shailapur, a pilgrimage city in the province of Maharashtra. Shailapur is one of the biggest districts in Maharashtra province. He then gradually proceeded toward Dravid Desha. Southern India is divided into 5 parts called Pancha Dravida. Northern India is also divided into 5 parts called Pancha Gauda. All the important acharyas of the modern age, namely Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Vishnu Swami, and Nimbarka, advented themselves in the Dravida provinces. Lord Chaitanya, however, appeared in Bengal, which is part of the 5 Gauda Desha.
The most important place of pilgrimage in southern India or Dravida is Venkatachala, commonly known as Balaji. After visiting the place, Lord Balrama proceeded toward the Vishnu Kanchi, and from there he proceeded on the bank of the Kaveri. While going to the river Kaveri, then he gradually reached Rangakshetra. The deity here is celebrated as Ranganath. There is a similar temple in Ranganath in Vrindavan. Although not as big as the temple in Rangakshetra, it is the biggest in Vrindavan. After visiting Rangakshetra, Lord Balrama gradually proceeded towards Madurai, commonly known as the Mathura of the southern India. After visiting this place, he gradually proceeded towards the Setubandha, the place where Lord Ramachandra constructed the stone bridge from India to Lanka, that is Ceylon. In this particular holy place, Lord Balrama distributed 10,000 cows to the local Brahmanas, priests. It is the Vedic customs that when a rich visitor goes to any place of pilgrimage, he gives the local priest houses, cows, ornaments, and garments as gifts of charity. This system of visiting place of pilgrimage and providing the local Brahmanas, priests, with all necessities of life has greatly deteriorated in this age of Kali. The richer section of the population, because of its degradation in Vedic culture, is no longer attracted by these places of pilgrimage, and the Brahmanas priests who depended on such visitors have also deteriorated in their professional duty of helping the visitors. These Brahmana priests in the place of pilgrimage are called the Panda or the Pandit. This means that they were formerly very learned Brahmanas and used to guide the visitors in all details of the purpose of coming there. And thus, both the visitors and the priest benefited by mutual cooperation.
It is clear from the description of Srimad Bhagavatam that when Lord Balarama was visiting the different places of pilgrimage, he properly followed the Vedic system. After distributing cows at Sedubandha, Lord Balarama proceeded toward the Kritamala and Tamrabarani rivers. These two rivers are celebrated as sacred, and Lord Balarama bathed in them both. He then proceeded toward Malaya Hill. This hill is very great, and it is said to be one of 7 peaks called the Malaya Hills. The great sage Agastya used to live there, and Lord Balarama visited him and offered his respects by bowing down before him. After taking the sage's blessings, Lord Balarama, with the sage's permission, proceeded toward the Indian Ocean.
At the point of the cape, known today as Cape Comorin, is a big temple of the goddess Durga, who is known there as Kanyakumari. This temple of Kanyakumari was also visited by Lord Ramchandra, and therefore it is to be understood that the temple has been existing for millions of years. From there, Lord Balarama went to visit the pilgrimage city known as Falguna Tirtha, which is on the shore of the Indian Ocean or the Southern Ocean. Falguna Tirtha is celebrated because Lord Vishnu in his incarnation of Ananta is lying there. From Falguna Tirtha, Lord Balarama went on to visit another pilgrimage spot known as Pancha Sparsa. There also he bathed according to the regulative principles and observed the ritualistic ceremonies. This site is also celebrated as a shrine of Lord Vishnu. Therefore, Lord Balarama distributed 10,000 cows to the Brahmana priests. To the local Brahmana priests.
From Cape Comorin, Lord Balram turned toward Kerala. The country of Kerala is still existing in southern India under the name of South Kerala. After visiting this place, he came to Gokarna Tirtha, where Lord Shiva is constantly worshipped. Balram then visited the temple of Arya Devi, which is completely surrounded by water. From that island, he went on to a place known as Shuraparaka. After this, he bathed in the rivers known as Tapi, Payosni, and Nirvindhya. And then he came to the forest known as Dandakaranya. This is the same Dandakaranya forest where Lord Ramchandra lived while in exile. Lord Balram next came to the bank of river Narmada, the biggest river in central India. On the bank of this sacred Narmada is a pilgrimage spot known as Mahismati Puri. After bathing there according to regulative principles, Lord Balram returned to Prabhasha Tirtha, where he had begun his journey.
When Lord Balram returned to Prabhasa Tirtha, he heard from the Brahmanas that most of the Kshatriyas in the battle of Kurukshetra had been killed. Balram felt relieved to hear that the burden of the world had been reduced. Lord Krishna and Balaram appeared on this earth to lessen the burden of military strength created by the ambitious Kshatriya kings. This is the way of materialistic life. Not being satisfied by the absolute necessities of life, people ambitiously create extra demands, and their illegal desires are checked by the laws of nature or the laws of God, appearing as famine, war, pestilence, and similar catastrophes. Lord Balram heard that although most of the Kshatriyas had been killed, the Kurus were still engaged in fighting. Therefore, he returned to the battlefield just on the day Bhimasen and Duryodhana were engaged in a personal duel. As the well-wisher of both of them, Lord Balram wanted to stop them, but they would not stop.
When Lord Balrama appeared on the scene, King Yudhishthira and his younger brothers Nakula and Sahadev, as well as Lord Krishna and Arjuna, immediately offered him their respectful obeisances, but they did not speak at all. The reason they were silent was that Lord Balrama was somewhat affectionate towards Duryodhana, who had learned from Balramji the art of fighting with a club. When the fighting was going on, King Yudhishthira and others thought that Balrama might have come there to say something in favor of Duryodhana, and they therefore remained silent. Both Duryodhana and Bhimasena were very enthusiastic in fighting with clubs, and in the midst of a large audience, each very skillfully tried to strike the other. While attempting to do so, they appeared to be dancing, but nonetheless, it was clear that both of them were very angry.
Lord Balarama wanting to stop the fighting, and my dear King Duryodhana and Bhimasena, I know that both of you are great fighters and are well known in the world as great heroes, but still I think that Bhimasena is superior to Duryodhana in bodily strength. On the other hand, Duryodhana is superior in the art of fighting with a club. Taking this into consideration, my opinion is that neither of you is inferior to the other in fighting. Under the circumstances, there is very little chance that one of you will be defeated by the other. Therefore, I request you not to waste your time fighting in this way. I wish you to stop this unnecessary fight.
The good instruction.
The good instruction given by Lord Balrama and Bhimsena and Duryodhana was intended for the equal benefit of both of them, but they were so enwrapped in anger against each other that they could remember only their long-standing personal enmity. Each thought only of killing the other, and they did not give much importance to the instruction of Lord Balrama. Both of them then became like madmen in remembering the strong accusations and ill behavior that they had exchanged with each other. Lord Balrama, being able to understand the destiny awaiting them, was not eager to further in the matter. Therefore, instead of staying, he decided to return to the city of Dwarika.
When he returned to Dwarka, he was received with great jubilation by relatives and friends, headed by King Ugrasena and other elder persons, who all came forward to welcome him. After this, he again went to the holy place of pilgrimage at Naimisharanya, and the sages, saintly persons, and Brahmanas all stood up to receive him. They understood that Lord Balram, although a Kshatriya, was now retired from the fighting business. The Brahmanas and sages, who were always for peace and tranquility, were very much pleased at this. All of them embraced Balram with great affection and induced him to perform various kinds of sacrifices in that sacred spot of Naimisharanya. Actually, Lord Balram had no business performing the sacrifices recommended for ordinary human beings. He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore he himself is the enjoyer of all such sacrifices. As such, his exemplary action in performing sacrifices was only to give a lesson to the common man to show how one should abide by the injunctions of the Vedas.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Balaram, instructed the sages and saintly persons at Naimisharanya on the subject matter of the living entity's relationship with this cosmic manifestation, on how one should regard this whole universe, and on how one should relate with the cosmos in order to achieve the highest goal of perfection. This supreme goal is the understanding that the whole cosmic manifestation rests on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is also all-pervading, even within the minute atom, by the function of his Paramatma feature.
Lord Balarama then took the Avarbhata path, which is taken after finishing sacrificial performances. After taking his bath, he dressed himself in new silken garments and decorated himself with beautiful jewelries. Amidst his relatives and friends, he appeared to be a shining full moon amidst the luminaries in the sky. Lord Balarama is the personality of Godhead, Ananta himself. Therefore, he is beyond the scope of understanding by mind, intelligence, or the body. He descended exactly like a human being and behaved in that way for his own purposes. We can only explain his activities as the Lord's pastimes. No one can even estimate the extent of the unlimited demonstrations of his pastimes because he is all powerful. Lord Balarama is the original Vishnu. Therefore, anyone remembering these pastimes of Lord Balarama in the morning and evening will certainly become a great devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus his life will be successful in all respects. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport of the 79th chapter of Krishna, the liberation of Bilvala and the Lord Balaram's touring the sacred places. Hari Bol!
Chapter 80. The meeting of Lord Krishna with Sudama Brahmana. King Parikshit was hearing the narrations of the pastimes of Lord Krishna and Lord Balarama from Sukadeva Goswami. These pastimes are all transcendently pleasurable to hear. And Maharaja Parikshit addressed Sukadeva Goswami as follows: My dear Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the bestower of all liberation and love of God simultaneously. Anyone who becomes a devotee of the Lord automatically attains liberation without having to make a separate attempt. Because the Lord is unlimited, his pastimes and activities for creating, maintaining, and destroying the whole cosmic manifestation are also unlimited. I therefore wish to hear about other pastimes of his of his which you may not have described as yet. My dear Master, the conditioned souls within this material world are frustrated by searching out the pleasure of happiness derived from sense gratification. Such desires for material enjoyment are always piercing the hearts of conditional souls. But I am actually experiencing how the transcendental topics of Lord Krishna's pastimes can relieve one from being affected by such material activities of sense gratification. I think that no intelligent person can reject this method of hearing the transcendental pastimes of the Lord again and again. Simply by hearing, one can remain always steeped in transcendental pleasure. Thus, one will not be attracted by material sense gratification.
In this statement, Maharaj Parikshit has used two important words, Visanna and Visheshagna. Visanna means morose. Materialistic people invent many ways and means to become fully satisfied, but actually they remain morose. The point may be raised that sometimes transcendentalists also remain morose. Parikshit Maharaj, however, has used the word Visheshagna. Therefore, there are two kinds of transcendentalists, namely the impersonalist and the personalist. Visheshagna refers to the personalists who are interested in transcendental variegatedness. The devotees become jubilant by hearing the descriptions of the personal activities of the Supreme Lord, whereas the impersonalists, who are actually more attracted by the impersonal feature of the Lord, are only superficially attracted by the Lord's personal activities. As such, in spite of coming in contact with the pastimes of the Lord, the impersonalists do not fully realize the benefit to be derived, and thus they become just as morose as the materialists do in pursuing their fruitive activities.
King Parikshit continued, the ability to talk can be perfected only by describing the transcendental qualities of the Lord. The ability to work with one's hand can be successful only when one engages himself in the service of the Lord with those hands. Similarly, one's mind can be peaceful only when one simply thinks of Krishna in full Krishna consciousness. This does not mean that one has to have very great thinking power. One has to understand simply that Krishna, the absolute truth, is all pervasive by his localized aspect of Paramatma. If one can simply think that Krishna as Paramatma is everywhere, even within the atom, then one can perfect the thinking, feeling, and willing functions of his mind. The perfect devotee does not see the world as it appears to material eyes, for he sees everywhere the presence of his worshipable Lord in his Paramatma feature.
Maharaj Parikshit continued by saying that the function of the ear can be perfected simply by engagement in hearing the transcendental activities of the Lord. And the function of the head can be fully utilized when the head is engaged in bowing down before the Lord and his representative. That the Lord is represented in everyone's heart is a fact, and therefore the highly advanced devotee offers his respects to every living entity, considering that the body is the temple of the Lord. But it is not possible for all men to come to that stage of life immediately, because that stage is for the first class devotee. The second class devotee can consider the Vaishnavas or the devotees of the Lord to be representatives of Krishna, And the devotee who is just beginning, the neophyte or third class devotee, can bow his head before the deity in the temple and before the spiritual master, who is the direct manifestation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, in the neophyte stage, in the intermediate stage, or in the fully advanced, perfected stage, one can make the function of the head perfect by bowing down before the Lord or his representative. Similarly, one can perfect the function of the eyes by seeing the Lord and his representative. In this way, everyone can elevate the functions of the different parts of his body to the highest perfectional stage simply by engaging them in the service of the Lord or his representative. If one is able to do nothing more, he can simply bow down before the Lord and his representative and drink the Charanamrit, the water which has washed the lotus feet of the Lord or his devotees.
On hearing these statements of Maharaj Parikshit, Sukadeva Goswami was overwhelmed with devotional ecstasy because of King Parikshit's advanced understanding of the Vaishnava philosophy. Shukadeva Goswami was already engaged in describing the activities of the Lord, and when asked by Maharaj Parikshit to describe them further, he continued to narrate Srimad Bhagavatam with great pleasure. There was a very nice Brahmana, friend of Lord Krishna. As a perfect Brahmana, he was very elevated in transcendental knowledge. And because of his advanced knowledge, he was not at all attracted to material enjoyment. Therefore, he was very peaceful and had achieved supreme control over his senses. This means that the Brahmana was a perfect devotee because unless one is a perfect devotee, he cannot achieve the highest standard of knowledge. It is stated in Bhagavad Gita that a person who has come to the perfection of knowledge surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other words, any person who has surrendered his life for the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead has come to the point of perfect knowledge. The result of perfect knowledge is that one becomes detached from the materialistic way of life. This detachment means complete control of the senses, which are always attracted by material enjoyment. The senses of the devotee become purified, and in that stage, the senses are engaged in the service of the Lord. That is the complete field of devotional service.
Although the Brahmana friend of Lord Krishna was a householder, he was not busy accumulating wealth for very comfortable living. Therefore, he was satisfied by the income which automatically came to him according to his destiny. This is the sign of perfect knowledge. A man in perfect knowledge knows that one cannot be happier than he is destined to be. In this material world, everyone is destined to suffer a certain amount of distress and enjoy a certain amount of happiness. The amount of happiness and distress is already predestined for every living entity. No one can increase or decrease the happiness of the materialistic way of life. The Brahmana, therefore, did not exert himself for more material happiness. Instead, he used his time for advancement of Krishna consciousness. Externally, he appeared very poor because he had no rich clothes and could not provide rich clothes for his wife, because their material condition was not very opulent. They were not even eating sufficiently, and thus both he and his wife appeared very thin. The wife was not anxious for her personal comfort, but she felt concern for her husband, who was such a pious Brahmana. She trembled due to her weak health. And although she did not like to dictate to her husband, she spoke as follows.
My dear Lord, I know that Lord Krishna, the husband of the goddess of fortune, is your personal friend. You are also a devotee of Lord Krishna, and he is always ready to help his devotee. Even if you think that you are not rendering any devotional service to the Lord, still you are surrendered to him, and the Lord is the protector of the surrendered soul. Moreover, I know that Lord Krishna is the ideal personality of Vedic culture. He is always in favor of Brahminical culture and is very kind to the qualified Brahmanas. You are the most fortunate person because you have a friend, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Lord Krishna is the only shelter for personalities like you because you are fully surrendered unto Him. You are saintly, learned, and fully in control of your senses. Under the circumstances, Lord Krishna is your only shelter. Please, therefore, go to Him. I am sure that He will immediately understand your impoverished position. You are a householder, therefore, without money, you are in distress. But as soon as He understands your position, He will certainly give you abundant riches so that you can live very comfortably. Lord Krishna is now the king of Bhoja, Vrishni, Andhaka dynasties, and I have heard that he never leaves his capital city, Dwarka. He is living there without outside engagements. He is so kind and liberal that he immediately gives everything, even his personal self, to any person who surrenders unto him. Since he is prepared to give himself personally to his devotee, there is nothing wonderful in giving some material riches. Of course, he does not give much material wealth to his devotee if the devotee is not very much fixed. But I think that in your case, he knows perfectly well how much you are fixed in devotional service. Therefore, he will not hesitate to award you some material benefit for the bare necessities of life.
In this way, the wife of the Brahmana again and again requested, in great humility and submission, that he go to Lord Krishna. The Brahmana thought that there was no need to ask any material benefit from Lord Krishna, but he was induced by the repeated request of his wife. Moreover, he thought, if I go there, I shall be able to see the Lord personally. That will be a great opportunity even if I don't ask any material benefit from him. When he had decided to go to Krishna, he asked his wife if she had anything in the home that he could offer to Lord Krishna, because he must take some presentation for his friend. The wife immediately collected 4 palmfuls of chipped rice from her neighborhood friends and tied it in a small cloth like a handkerchief and gave it to her husband to present to Krishna. Without waiting any longer, the Brahmana took the presentation and proceeded toward Dwarika to see his Lord. He was absorbed in the thought of how he could be able to see Lord Krishna. He had no thought within his heart other than Krishna.
It was, of course, very difficult to reach the palaces of the kings of the Yadu dynasty, but Brahmanas were allowed to visit. When the Brahmana friend of Lord Krishna went there, he along with other Brahmanas had to pass through 3 military encampments. In each camp there were very big gates, and he also had to pass through them. After the gates and the camps, there were 16,000 big palaces. the residential quarters of the 16,000 queens of Lord Krishna. The Brahmana entered one palace which was very gorgeously decorated. When he entered this beautiful palace, he felt that he was swimming in the ocean of transcendental pleasure. He felt himself constantly diving and surfacing in that transcendental ocean.
At that time, Lord Krishna was sitting on the bedstead of Queen Rukmini. Even from a considerable distance, he could see the Brahmana coming to his home, and he could recognize him as his friend. Lord Krishna immediately left his seat and came forward to receive his Brahmana friend, and upon reaching him, embraced the Brahmana with his two arms. Lord Krishna is the reservoir of all transcendental pleasure. Yet, he himself felt great pleasure upon embracing the poor Brahmana because he was meeting his very dear friend. Lord Krishna had him seated on his own bedstead and personally brought all kinds of fruits and drinks to offer him, as is proper in receiving a worshipable guest. Lord Sri Krishna is the supreme pure, but because he was playing the role of an ordinary human being, he immediately washed the Brahmana's feet and for his own purification sprinkled the water onto his head. After this, the Lord smeared the body of Brahmana with different kinds of scented pulp, such as sandalwood, aguru, and saffron. He immediately burned several kinds of scented incense and, as is usual, offered him arti with burning lamps. After thus offering him an adequate welcome, and after the Brahmana had taken food and drink, Lord Krishna said, "My dear friend, it is a great fortune that you have come here."
The Brahmana, being very poor, was not dressed nicely. His clothing was torn and dirty, and his body was very lean and thin. He appeared not very clean, and because of his weak body, his bones were distinctly visible. The goddess of fortune, Rukmini Devi, personally began to fan him with the chamara fan. But the other women in the palace were astonished at Lord Krishna's behavior in receiving the Brahmana in that way. They were surprised to see how eager Lord Krishna was to welcome this particular Brahmana. They wondered how Lord Krishna could personally receive a Brahmana who was poor, not very neat or clean, and poorly dressed, but at the same time, they could realize that the Brahmana was not an ordinary living being. They knew that he must have performed great pious activities. Otherwise, why was Lord Krishna, the husband of goddess of fortune, taking care of him so much? They were still more surprised to see that the Brahmana was seated on the bedstead of Lord Krishna. They were especially surprised to see that Lord Krishna had embraced him exactly as he embraced his elder brother Balaramji, because Lord Krishna used to embrace only Rukmini or Balarama and no one else.
After the Brahmana had received nicely and seated on Lord Krishna's own cushioned bed, he and Krishna took each other's hands and began to talk about their early life, when they had both lived under the protection of the Gurukula, a boarding school. Lord Krishna said, "My dear Brahmana friend, you are a most intelligent personality and you know very well the principles of religious life. I believe that after you finished your education at the house of our teacher and after you sufficiently remunerated him, you must have gone back to your home and accepted a suitable wife. I know very well that from the beginning you were not at all attached to the materialistic way of life, nor did you desire to be very opulent materially, and therefore you are in need of money. In this material world, persons who are not attached to material opulence are very rarely found. Such unattached persons haven't the least desire to accumulate wealth and prosperity for sense gratification, but sometimes they are found to collect money just to exhibit the exemplary life of a householder. They show how, by proper distribution of wealth, one can become an ideal householder and at the same time a great devotee. Such ideal householders are to be considered followers of my footsteps. I hope, my dear Brahmana friend, that you remember all those days of our school life when you and I were living together at the boarding school. Actually, whatever knowledge you and I received in life was accumulated in our student life.
If a man is sufficiently educated in student life under the guidance of a proper teacher, his life becomes successful in the future. He can very easily cross over the ocean of nescience, and he is not subject to the influence of the illusory energy. My dear friend, everyone should consider his father to be his first teacher, because by the mercy of one's father one gets this body. The father is therefore the natural spiritual master. Our next spiritual master is he who initiates us into transcendental knowledge, and he is to be worshipped as much as I am. The spiritual master may be more than one. The spiritual master who instructs the disciple about spiritual matters is called the Siksha Guru, and the spiritual master who initiates the disciple is called the Diksha Guru. Both of them are my representatives. There may be many spiritual masters who instruct, but the initiator spiritual master is one. A human being who takes advantage of these spiritual masters and receiving proper knowledge from them crosses the ocean of material existence is to be understood as having properly utilized his human form of life. He has practical knowledge that the ultimate interest of life, which is to be gained only in this human form, is to achieve spiritual perfection and thus be transferred back home, back to Godhead.
My dear friend, I am Paramatma, the super soul present in everyone's heart, and it is my direct order that human society follow the principles of Varna and Ashrama. As I have stated in the Bhagavad Gita, human society should be divided into 4 Varnas, according to quality and action. Similarly, everyone should divide his life into 4 parts. One should utilize the first part of life in becoming a bona fide student, receiving adequate knowledge, and keeping oneself in the vow of brahmacharya, so that one may completely devote his life for the service of the spiritual master, without indulging in sense gratification. A brahmachari is meant to lead a life of austerities and penance. The householder is meant to live a regulated life of sense gratification. But no one should remain a householder for the 3rd stage of life. In that stage, one has to return to the austerities and penances formerly practiced in brahmachari life, and thus relieve himself of the attachment to household life. After being relieved of his attachments to the materialistic way of life, one may accept the order of sannyasa.
As the super soul of the living entities, I sit in everyone's heart and observe everyone's activity in every stage and order of life. regardless of which stage one is in, when I see that one is engaged seriously and sincerely in discharging the duties ordered by the spiritual master and is thus dedicating his life to the service of the spiritual master, that person becomes most dear to me. As far as the life of brahmacharya is concerned, if one can continue the life of a brahmachari under the direction of a spiritual master, that is extremely good. But if in brahmachari life one feels sex impulses, he should take leave of his spiritual master, satisfying him according to the Guru's desire. According to the Vedic system, a gift is offered to the spiritual master, which is called Guru Dakshina. Then the disciple should take the householder life and accept a wife according to religious rites.
These instructions given by Lord Krishna while talking with his friend, the learned Brahmana, are very good for the guidance of human society. A system of human civilization that does not promote varna and ashrama is nothing but a polished animal society. Indulgence in sex life by a man or woman living single is never acceptable in human society. A man should strictly follow the principles of brahmachari life, or with the permission of the spiritual master should get married. Single life with illicit sex is animal life, for the animals have no such instructions as marriage. Modern society does not aim at fulfilling the mission of human life, which is to go back home, back to Godhead. To fulfill this mission, the system of varna and ashrama must be followed. When the system is followed rigidly and consciously, it fulfills this mission. But when followed indirectly without the guidance of superior authority, it simply creates a disturbing condition in human society, and there is no peace and prosperity.
Krishna continued to talk with his Brahmana friend. My dear friend, I think you remember our activities during the days when we are living as students. You may remember that once we went to collect fuel from the forest on the order of the Guru's wife. While collecting the dried wood, we entered the dense forest and by chance became lost. There was an unexpected dust storm, and then clouds and lightning in the sky, and the explosive sound of thunder. Then sunset came, and we were lost in the dark jungle. After this, there was severe rainfall. The whole ground was overflooded with water, and we could not trace out the way to return to our Guru's ashrama. You may remember that heavy rainfall. It was not actually rainfall, but a sort of devastation. On account of the dust storm and the heavy rain, we began to feel greatly pained, and in whichever direction we turned, we were bewildered. In that distressed condition, we took each other's hand and tried to find out way out. We passed the whole night in that way, and early in the morning, when our absence became known to our Gurudeva, he sent his other disciples to search us out. He also came with them, and when they reached us in the jungle, they found us very much distressed.
With great compassion, our Gurudev said, "My dear boys, it is very wonderful that you have suffered so much trouble for me. Everyone likes to take care of his body as the first consideration, but you are so good and faithful to your Guru that without caring for bodily comforts, you have taken so much trouble for me. I am glad to see that bona fide students like you will undergo any kind of trouble for the satisfaction of spiritual master. This is the way for a bona fide disciple to become free from his debt to the spiritual master. It is the duty of the disciple to dedicate his life to the service of the spiritual master. My dear best of the twice born, I am greatly pleased by your acts, and I bless you. May all your desires and ambitions be fulfilled. May the understanding of the Vedas, which you have learned from me, always continue to remain within your memory, so that at every moment you can remember the teachings of the Vedas and quote their instructions without difficulty. Thus, you will never be disappointed in this life or the next.
Krishna continued, "My dear friend, you may remember that many such incidents occurred while we were in the ashrama of our spiritual master. Both of us can realize that without the blessing of the spiritual master, no one can be happy. By the mercy of the spiritual master and by his blessings, one can achieve peace and prosperity and be able to fulfill the mission of human life." On hearing this, the learned Brahmana replied, "My dear Krishna, you are the Supreme Lord and the Supreme Spiritual Master of everyone. And since I was fortunate enough to live with you in the house of our Guru, I think I have nothing more to do in the matter of prescribed Vedic duties. My dear Lord, the Vedic hymns, ritualistic ceremonies, religious activities, and all other necessities for the perfection of human life, including economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, are all derived from one source, your Supreme Personality. Although different processes of life are ultimately meant for understanding your personality. In other words, they are the different parts of your transcendental form. And yet, you played the role of a student and live with us in the house of the Guru. This means that you adopted all these pastimes for your pleasure only. Otherwise, there was no need for your playing the role of a human being. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport of the 80th chapter of Krishna, the meeting of Lord Krishna with Sudama Brahmana.
So that concludes of our 1 hour of reading Krishna book to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada, for allowing us to come every Sunday and read Krishna book to you. And as usual, let us offer our respectful obeisances to Srila Prabhupada and to each other. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. And to each other, Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Krishna Book, Jai Srila Prabhupada.